The forced bond, the alien Princess Zalari, was the pride of her people. She came from the royal bloodline of the Varelian Empire, a race known for their beauty, power, and long history of looking down on other species. Her skin was pale silver, her eyes golden and sharp. Every step she took was filled with grace. Every word she spoke carried weight. But now, for the first time in her life, she was afraid. The High Council had made a decision. To avoid war with the humans, they would offer peace through marriage. Not just any marriage, but the bonding of their own royal daughter with a human male. Princess Zalari was to marry a human named Jace Rennick. He was a diplomat from Earth, a man of no noble blood, a man not even of their species. To Zalari, the news was worse than death. She had grown up hearing stories about humans, dirty, loud, and full of emotions. They were said to live short, violent lives and had no real honor. She had never met one in person. She never wanted to, but now she had no choice. Her father gave her a command, and royal daughters did not disobey. Zalari sat still as her advisors prepared her for the bond. They explained the rules, the expectations. They warned her to stay distant and not let the human believe he had power. This marriage was for peace, not love. It was duty, not desire. When Jace entered the hall for the first time, Zalari did not raise her eyes. She felt his presence. It was strange. He did not smell like her people. His heartbeat was slower. His steps were heavier. But there was no rudeness in him, no smugness. He did not try to speak first. He only gave a short, respectful nod, then stood quietly. Zalari thought he would be proud, loud, maybe even try to touch her. But he did nothing. He waited, as if he understood she wanted distance. That night she refused to eat. She thought the food brought by the humans would be awful. But Jace said nothing. Instead, he had a fresh meal brought from her homeworld without asking. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He was not trying to win her. He was simply thoughtful. The days passed slowly. They lived in the same building but stayed apart. Jace spoke only when needed. He did not force conversation. He did not enter her space. He left small comforts near her door, books in her language, warm drinks, and once even a flower from her home planet. But he never asked for thanks. He never waited around to see her reaction. Zalari found herself confused. This human was not what she expected. He was not rude. He was not loud. He did not act like he owned her. He treated her like a person, not a trophy or a tool for peace. One day she asked her maid, "Why is he being so calm?" The maid replied, "Perhaps he knows you are afraid. Perhaps he wants to show you he is not a monster." Zalari laughed at the idea. A human with manners? Impossible. But deep inside, the laugh did not feel real. It felt weak. She began to wonder. Her people called the humans dirty, but Jace was clean. They called them wild, but he was gentle. They said humans only think of war. But Jace brought peace and asked for nothing in return. Zalari didn't trust him. Not yet. But something had changed. Her fear had softened. Her anger had grown quiet. Every time she expected him to act like the beast her people warned her about, he did the opposite. She remembered the first time they stood side by side at the ceremony. Her hand shook as she reached for the bonding crystal. He noticed but said nothing. He didn't smirk. He didn't mock. He simply waited until she was ready. She thought he would rush or grab the crystal himself. But no. He moved only after she did. That small act stayed in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, this bond would not be as terrible as she feared. She still didn't want it. She still didn't like him. But she was watching now. Not with hate, not with fear, but with questions. Who was this human who broke all the rules of what she had been taught? Why did he act with kindness instead of control? What was he hiding behind those quiet eyes? The bond had been forced. She never wanted it. But now she had to admit, He was not the monster in her storybooks. And that truth scared her more than anything, because it meant she might have been wrong. And if she was wrong about him, what else had she been wrong about? That night as she lay in bed, she could not sleep. She didn't know it yet, but something deep inside her heart had already begun to shift. Not love, not yet, but the first crack in the wall she had built, and it all started with a human who never even tried to touch her. Silent kindness. Everyone expected the human to make a mistake. They waited for him to act too proud, speak too much, or demand something he didn't deserve. But Jace didn't do any of that. His silence confused them. It even confused Zalari. She watched him from a distance, waiting for him to show his true colors. But he stayed the same, quiet, respectful, and calm. In her private space, Zalari asked herself again and again, what does he want? She didn't trust him. She couldn't. Her people had warned her. Humans always had a hidden plan. But Jace never asked for anything. He didn't try to enter her private quarters. He didn't try to impress her. He just lived beside her like a shadow that made no sound. Every morning a soft knock came at her door. A tray of warm food would be there. Sometimes it was her favorite fruit. Sometimes it was a tea known only to her people. She never asked for it, yet it came. There was no note, no request for thanks, no face waiting behind the door. Only the quiet proof that someone was thinking of her needs. She started testing him. One day she threw the tea away. The next morning it was replaced with a different kind, one she hadn't had since her childhood. She stared at the cup, her hands trembling slightly. How did he even know? During the evenings she walked in the royal gardens. At first she thought Jace was following her, but she soon realized he wasn't. He stayed far behind, never walking on the same path. Just close enough to protect, but never too close to disturb. One evening her foot caught on a stone and she stumbled. Before she could fall, strong arms caught her. She froze. Her eyes met Jace's. He quickly helped her stand, then backed away without a word. He looked more concerned than proud. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't joke or smile. He only gave a short, respectful nod and walked away. That moment stayed in her mind. She told herself he was pretending, that he was trained to act this way, that it was all part of some human trick. But her heart began to feel differently. It didn't beat faster with fear when he was near. It didn't fill with hate, it just calmed. And that scared her. One night, she found something on her bed. A small book, not in her language, but written in his. She didn't understand the words, but there were pictures of stars, oceans, and people. Human people. Smiling, helping, building. At the back of the book was a drawing. It showed a small girl standing with a tall, alien figure. They were holding hands under the stars. She looked at the cover again. The name of the book was written in his language, but underneath there was a small translation in hers. Together, not alone. She didn't know why that touched her so deeply. The next morning, she placed the book outside her door. When she opened the door again, it was gone. She thought maybe it had ended there. But the next evening, there was another book. This one had no words, only pictures. A journey of a human boy who gave water to a dying creature. The boy was laughed at, shamed. But in the end, the creature grew wings and carried him to safety. Zalari kept this book. She said nothing to Jace. He said nothing to her, but something had changed between them. A silent exchange, a quiet trust beginning to grow. Her people noticed. They whispered behind her back. Her maid asked softly, "Are you beginning to care for him?" Zalari snapped, "No, I'm only trying to understand him." But her voice shook. Later that night, she walked into the common room and found something strange. Jace was sitting near a table, carefully fixing a piece of jewelry. Her bracelet, the one she had dropped days ago and thought was lost. He was using tiny tools, his hands gentle, his eyes focused. She stood in the shadows and watched. When he finished, he placed the bracelet on the table, stood up, and left. Not once did he look around to see if someone was watching. He had done it just to fix it, not for reward, not for thanks, just because. Silari didn't sleep that night. Everything she believed was breaking apart. The stories about humans, the hate passed down through generations, the fear in her heart. Jace had never tried to win her. He had only tried to live with respect. And now she didn't know who she was more afraid of, him or herself, because something had started inside her, a soft warmth, a whisper of something dangerous. Hope. And once hope begins, it's very hard to stop. The touch that changed everything. She had promised herself never to touch him, not even by accident. Silari believed if she let even one boundary fall, the rest would follow, and she would lose control. But sometimes change does not come with loud sounds or warnings. Sometimes it comes with a single touch, unexpected, soft, and unforgettable. It began during a formal event hosted by the Varelian court. Alien leaders from many planets were present. The goal was to show that the royal bond between the princess and the human was strong, but everyone could see the truth. Silari still stood far from Jace, never looked him in the eyes, and only spoke to him when required. Whispers floated in the air like smoke. Some laughed quietly. Others said, "The princess hates her human. This marriage won't last." Silari held her chin high, trying to ignore them, but inside her emotions were a storm. As the event continued, she stepped forward toward the main platform, her long gown brushing against the cold crystal floor. She didn't notice the loose edge of the step. Her foot twisted, her balance broke. In that single moment, the pride of the Varelian Empire began to fall, but she never hit the ground. Two strong arms caught her, warm, solid, steady. Jace had moved faster than anyone expected, even faster than her trained guards. His hands held her gently, just enough to stop her fall, but not too tight to frighten her. Silari froze. For a moment, her golden eyes stared straight into his. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to catch her breath. Everyone in the hall went silent. Her people gasped. A human had touched the princess. But what she noticed most was this. Jace looked worried, not proud. He didn't smile. He didn't enjoy the attention. He whispered only one word. "Are you hurt?" It was the first time he had ever spoken to her so directly. She could have pushed him away. She could have shouted at him. That would have protected her image. That would have been expected. But she didn't. Instead, she stood still in his arms for just a moment longer than she should have. Just long enough for the heat from his hands to reach her skin. Just long enough to realize that she wasn't afraid. He let go first. He stepped back, lowered his head slightly in apology, and returned to his place without another word. The ceremony continued. The music returned. But nothing inside Silari was the same. That touch had broken something inside her, not in a painful way, but in a way that made her question everything. She returned to her chambers that night and stared at her reflection. Her heart was still beating faster than normal. Not from fear, not from shame, but from something she didn't want to name. The next morning, she avoided him. She couldn't face him after what had happened. Her people would be talking. Her council would demand explanations. She had been seen being held by a human. It was a scandal. But Jace said nothing. He didn't try to speak to her. He didn't act like he had done something brave. He returned to his usual quietness, as if nothing had happened. Silari didn't understand. If their roles had been reversed, her people would be bragging. A Varelian male would use the moment to gain status. But Jace acted like he didn't care about power or pride, and that made her think. She began to remember the feeling of his arms, not strong in a threatening way, but strong in a protective one. She remembered how he stepped back first, how he didn't try to hold her longer than needed, how his only concern was if she was hurt. That memory stayed with her through the week. She even began dreaming about it. Not as a nightmare, but as something soft, confusing, and warm. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, calm, quiet, and patient. It became harder to hate him. She watched him more now, not from behind walls of judgment, but with curious eyes. How he helped servants without being asked. How he sat in the garden and listened to the wind. How he never interrupted anyone, not even the lowest in rank. These things were small, but they mattered. One afternoon, as she walked past him in the hall, he stepped aside to let her pass, as usual. But this time she stopped. Her voice was quiet. "Thank you for that day." Jace looked at her with calm eyes. He gave a small nod. "You're welcome." That was all. No extra words, no pressure, just peace. And for the first time since the bond had begun, Zalari felt her guard drop, not out of weakness, but out of something new. Trust. The truth about humanity. Zalari had always believed her people were superior. That belief was not a choice, it was tradition. It had been taught to her through books, through speeches, through every glance and word from her elders. Humans were simple, emotional, and short-lived. Their value, if any, came from their usefulness, not their worth. But Jace never acted like he needed to prove his worth. And that made her wonder. What if everything she believed had been wrong? After the fall at the ceremony, after the touch that still echoed through her body, Zalari found herself drawn to the quiet spaces. Spaces where she could think. Spaces where no one could see her confusion. She began spending more time in the old records hall, a quiet part of the palace where alien knowledge was stored. There she found something unexpected. A section on human history, rarely used, covered in dust, ignored by most. She picked up one of the old archives and began to read. It was about Earth's past, wars, yes, but also healing. Disasters followed by human hands helping each other. Struggles, but also sacrifices. A species that had suffered greatly but never stopped hoping. They didn't have the long lives of the Varelians. They didn't have advanced minds or perfect strength, but they had something else. Something deep. Something powerful. She read about a human who gave up his life to save strangers in a collapsing space station, another who crossed galaxies just to rescue a lost child from a dead world, a woman who adopted orphans from 3 different species, a man who rebuilt a broken village with his bare hands. These stories were not told with pride. They were told with love. She paused. Why had she never seen these stories before? Why had her people hidden them? Back in her room, she opened the book Jace had left her earlier, the one with the wordless story, the human boy and the dying creature. She saw it differently now. She saw not a silly tale, but a message. The boy had no power, no armor, no royal blood, but he saved a life with kindness. Kindness. That was what Jace had been showing her this whole time. It wasn't weakness, it wasn't a trick, it was just who he was. The next day, Zalari passed by the common area and noticed Jace sitting quietly. He was carving something small in his hands. She didn't mean to stop, but she did. Her eyes followed his movements, careful, patient, gentle. She stepped forward. "What is that?" she asked. He looked up, surprised she spoke. "A gift," he said, "for a friend back home." She looked at the wooden shape. It was a bird, its wings open, like it was about to fly. "Why a bird?" she asked. Jace smiled softly. "Because they don't need power to rise, just freedom." Didn't know what to say, so she walked away. But those words stayed with her. That night she searched more human history. This time, not just the records, but also art, music, and voices. Human voices singing about love, pain, dreams, and peace. Their songs didn't need perfect notes. Their words weren't always logical, but they felt real. They felt alive. She began to understand something no one had told her before. Humans weren't lesser. They were different. They didn't shine with power like the Varelians. but they burned with something stronger. Heart. The next morning she saw Jace fixing the water system in the outer courtyard. A small task, one a servant should do. But he was on his knees, sleeves rolled up, helping without complaint. Dirt covered his hands, but he smiled as he worked. When a young alien child dropped a container nearby, Jace helped her gather the pieces without even thinking. No one told him to. He just did it. Solari watched from the shadows, feeling her throat tighten. Her people had told her that humans were dirty, but now she saw that dirt could come from kindness too, from effort, from care, from service. He wasn't dirty. He was real. He was flawed in ways her people didn't understand. But he had something they had forgotten: humility. And somehow that was more beautiful than perfection. She didn't speak to him that day, but in the quiet of her chamber she looked at her reflection and whispered to herself, "I need to learn more. Not about war, not about duty, but about him, about his people, about what it really meant to be human. Because maybe, just maybe." She didn't want to be right anymore. She wanted to be honest, and the truth was starting to shine through. Her first step forward, all her life, Solari had walked ahead of others. Protocol demanded it. Pride required it. As a princess, she never followed. She never paused. She never reached out. But that day, for the first time, she slowed her steps. And when Jace walked beside her, she didn't move away. She let him stay. It began with silence, as it always did between them. They were walking through the outer gardens of the embassy station, a place filled with strange earth flowers gifted during the peace process. Solari had walked there many times alone, but this time she didn't mind the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She welcomed it. Something inside her had changed, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't loud. But it was real. A quiet shift, like the first warm breeze after a long winter. And that breeze carried the human's name, Jace. The moment she finally reached for him was small, almost invisible. They were sitting near a glowing fountain, pretending not to look at each other. Jace was carving again, his hand steady. She had been watching for several minutes when she saw a mark on his wrist, a red scratch from the water pipe he had fixed earlier. Without thinking, she spoke. "You're hurt." Jace looked at the scratch, then at her. "It's nothing." Still, she pulled out a soft cloth from her sleeve. Slowly, carefully, she held his hand and began to clean the scratch. He didn't move. She didn't stop, and for the first time, she touched him not out of fear, not out of accident, but by choice. Their eyes met. No words were said, but something passed between them. Not a promise. Not yet, but a beginning. Later that day, she walked beside him during a council event. The noble guests froze. The princess wasn't walking ahead. She wasn't avoiding him. She wasn't ashamed. She stood, shoulder to shoulder with the human. The whispers returned. She walks with him. She touched him. She smiled. Her maid looked at her with worry. "The council will notice." Solari answered simply, "Let them." At dinner, she spoke directly to Jace across the table. She asked about his family, about Earth, about his home. He answered carefully, never boasting. He told her stories about a dog he raised, about the snow in the mountains, about the sound of rain on an old roof. His words were simple, but they made her imagine a world full of small, soft things she had never known, and slowly she began to want to know more. That night she stood on her balcony, looking at the stars. She whispered, "What are you doing to me, Jace Rennick?" The stars didn't answer, but her heart did. She remembered a moment from her childhood. Her mother once told her, "The bravest thing a princess can do is choose kindness when pride is easier." She never understood those words, until now. In the days that followed, she made her first real move, not with politics, not with rules, but with heart. She invited Jace to walk with her again, in public, not as a stranger, but as someone she trusted. At first he seemed surprised. Then he nodded. As they walked together, a Varelian elder scowled at her and muttered, "You shame your blood." Zalari stopped walking. She turned, held Jace's arm, and said loud enough for all to hear, "This is not shame. This is strength." The elder said nothing more. After that, everything changed. Some stared, others whispered. But Zalari stood taller than ever before. Not because she was a princess, but because she had taken the first step toward something bigger than tradition, bigger than pride. A connection. The bond once forced by politics had now started to grow on its own, and all it took was one small step forward, and the courage to take it. Betrayal and fire. When hearts begin to open, the world around them often tightens its grip. Not everyone wanted the bond between Zalari and Jace to grow, and some were willing to destroy it before it bloomed. It began with a cup of wine. The palace was hosting a gathering for allied ambassadors. Zalari and Jace attended together side by side. Her hand rested gently on his arm now, not just for appearances, but by her own will. Her people noticed. Some remained silent. Others showed open disapproval. But she didn't care anymore. She had chosen him. Jace smiled politely through the evening, unaware that someone's smile in return was hiding something deadly. Later that night, as the guests left and stars watched over the stillness, Zalari found Jace lying on the floor of his room. His eyes were glassy, his breathing shallow. The cup of wine he had held earlier lay shattered beside him. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She ran. Guards followed her commands. Human medics were rushed in. And through it all, Zalari stayed by his side, holding his hand, whispering his name again and again. Her fingers trembled, her breath was sharp, but she refused to let go. "He must live," she whispered to the doctor. He must. She had never prayed before. But that night she prayed with all she had, not to any god, but to whatever power had brought this human into her life. Jace fought to breathe. Machines beeped. Medicine worked. Time passed. When his kissed eyes opened, barely, Zalari leaned close. Tears fell from her golden eyes, the same eyes that once looked at him with fear. "You came back," she whispered. He smiled weakly. "Didn't want to miss your next insult." She laughed through her tears and held his hand tighter, but peace would not return so easily. The palace launched an investigation. The wine had been poisoned, expertly, quietly, with a substance used only by high-ranking officials. It was no accident. Someone had tried to end him. Someone who couldn't stand the thought of a human standing beside a princess. Kalari stood before the council the next day, her voice cold as steel. "Whoever tried to kill him has declared war not on a man, but on peace itself." The council warned her to remain calm. They called it an unfortunate incident. They begged her to keep the matter private to avoid diplomatic scandal. But Zalari had changed. She was no longer the princess who obeyed in silence. She was the woman who had nearly lost the only person who ever touched her soul without taking anything. She stood before the media herself. She told the galaxy what happened. She declared that she would protect Jace not as a symbol, not as a tool, but as a partner, as someone she chose. Her people were shocked. Her enemies grew bold. Threats came in shadows. Warnings arrived by the hour. Still, she didn't back down. She moved Jace to her private quarters, sat beside him day and night, fed him when he was too weak to lift his spoon. He tried to protest, to joke, to act strong. She silenced him with a look. "I nearly lost you once," she said. "I won't let that happen again." In those quiet days of healing, they spoke more than ever before. Of his dreams, her fears, his past, her loneliness. Jace told her how he once feared he'd never belong anywhere. She told him she had never belonged anywhere except a cage made of duty. Now they belonged only to each other. But the fire was not over. Behind closed doors, a plan was forming. If the council could not separate them, they would silence one of them. Zalari's maid came to her one night, trembling. "They plan to send him away," she whispered. To Earth, to keep you safe. They say it's for your protection. Zilari didn't hesitate. If they try, she said, I will burn this palace to the ground. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid to lose her crown, because, now, she had something more precious. Love, not in words, but in actions, in fire, and fire, once awakened, does not go quietly. A princess's choice. The palace buzzed with rumors. Some said the princess would obey her counsel and send Jace away. Others whispered she would break the bond and return to her lonely throne. But Zilari felt only one truth in her heart. She would choose him. That morning, she dressed in her royal robes, silver and blue, but she felt no pride in them. Her mind was on Jace. He had recovered enough to stand, but was still weak. She found him struggling to button his shirt. Without a word, she stepped forward and fastened each button with careful fingers. He looked at her, surprised by her gentle touch. She said softly, I have a choice. He nodded. I know. They walked to the grand hall, where the council waited. Noble lords and ladies filled the room. Journalists and diplomats watched, from the back. At the center stood a pedestal holding the ancient bonding crystal, a symbol that once forced them together. Zilari's chest tightened as she approached it. Her father, King Arves, spoke first. My daughter, this marriage was made for peace, but your actions have threatened the Empire's order. His voice was stern, but his eyes were sad. She raised her head. Father, the bond you created has grown beyond politics. Her voice echoed in the silent hall. I have lived by duty my whole life, but now I live by choice. Gasps filled the room. She stepped to the pedestal, reached out her hand, and lifted the bonding crystal. Its light pulsed gently. With calm strength, she placed the crystal in Jace's hand. I release you from the treaty, she declared, but I bind myself to you. She held his gaze. The room fell quieter than ever. Jace stood beside her, crystal glowing between them. For centuries, the crystal had forced unity. Now she repurposed it as her symbol of love. One by one, the council members rose. Some bowed in respect. Others glared in anger. But Zilari felt only relief. She had broken tradition, and nothing had shattered. Instead, something new had formed. When the ceremony ended, Zilari led Jace outside. The courtyard was warm with morning light. She turned to him, her golden eyes bright. I choose you, she said again. Not because I must, but because I want to. Jace smiled, his eyes moist. He took her hand and kissed the crystal in her palm. Then we face the future together, he replied. She nodded. Together. In the days that followed, the Empire surprised them. Instead of war, many citizens celebrated the princess's bravery. They saw that love could be stronger than fear, kindness more powerful than pride. Even some of her critics conceded they had been wrong. Zilari and Jace walked side by side across the palace grounds. No longer bound by duty, they were united, by choice. The alien princess, once terrified of a dirty human, had found more than peace. She had found a partner, an ally, and a new path forward, and in that choice, she discovered the greatest power of all, the power to change one's own destiny.